everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for Emma Explores. This is part of our ongoing series of events for Project Kin, where we take a moment with a professional genealogist, Emma Cox, from who works in out of Kent in England, and can share with all of us some of the insights she's gleaned from studying her own family. She always includes with each one of these stories and some extraordinary resources that we can apply to our own stories. And today she's going to be looking into names, a topical question. So over to you, Emma.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I will just share my screen. Give me a moment. Oh, come back again. Can you all see that? Yep. Excellent. Okay, so today my talk, I've entitled it just this very simple one, Names in My Family Tree. So for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Emma Cox. I'm a family historian and genealogist and based in Tunbridge Wells in Kent in England, as Barbara said. And I do research for other people. I help people find out about their ancestors, put together family trees charts, investigate DNA, find living people, edit and write books, and take people on tours of the places their ancestors lived and worked. I also have a podcast called Journeys into Genealogy, and I've just done 101 episodes on that one now, where I interview experts and people with interesting family stories. So today I'm going to be talking about names in different aspects. So I'm going to be talking about surnames, middle names, naming conventions, and some of the more unusual names in my family tree. So you can see a few of them in the image on the right there. Some of them are quite short and some of them are quite long. So starting off with one particular line, this is on my father's side. This is Bennett Edwards. So my 2 times great-grandfather, Henry Bennett Edwards, he was born in 1837 and he died in 1914. And I'm very fortunate that I actually have a little miniature painting of him that was identified fairly recently as being him. His father was Thomas Bennett Edwards, who was born in 1806. And sadly, he died aged just 31 in 1839. He was the vicar of St. Stephen's in Saltash in Cornwall. And his daughter put up this memorial, which is actually in the church. This is one of my photographs that I took a few years ago when we went down there to visit. So Thomas Bennett Edwards and Henry Bennett Edwards. So how did Bennett Edwards itself come about? Thomas Bennett Edwards was the son of Thomas Edwards of Saltash and Mary Bennett. So they didn't hyphenate their surname, but they ended up using both names as their surname. And I have actually seen it occasionally written with a hyphen between it, so it makes it all one word, or 2 separate words as the surname. So that is actually 2 different surnames, but in this case, you've just got Thomas Bennett Edwards and Henry Bennett Edwards. So you might think that someone is starting a trend by doing that. Well, actually, no. Henry was the last one to actually use Bennett Edwards, and he had 7 children, and they just decided to use Edwards. So I have no idea why, but they did. So what happened to Bennett? You might think it just disappeared. Well, Bennett lives on. So Henry's daughter, Naomi, so my great-grandmother married my great-grandfather, Percy Stuart Cox, and they had their eldest son, and they called him Bennett Percy Cox. And this is my grandfather, and this is taken at his 40th wedding anniversary in the 1970s, I think that was. So quite a long time ago. He was a lovely man. I knew him well. And so he was Bennett Percy Cox. And then they decided to name my father. He wasn't Bennett as a first name. It was used as a middle name. And then my father did it for my brother, and my brother did it for my nephew. So the name Bennett has continued, but not as a surname. So in terms of middle names, a middle name can be a really good identifier to give you a clue to one or more ancestors in your tree. It could be that somebody actually has more than one middle name. It could be that there are particular patterns. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. So in England and in Scotland, there are different naming patterns. I'm just going to take you to that link and show you. This is a link from Family Tree magazine. If anybody doesn't know this, there are two magazines in England. There's Who Do You Think You Are? And there's Family Tree magazine. Family Tree magazine in England is very different from Family Tree in America, and not the same at all. This is Family Tree in England. So in here, you can see you've got England and Ireland. The first son is named after the father's father. The first daughter is named after the mother's mother. The second son after the mother's father, and so it goes on. And then you can see that it changes. It's different in Scotland. So you can see there's one there and there's another one for girls. So it can be really helpful if you're trying to find information on a family and you're trying to work out if the person you have discovered is of the right line. If you can suddenly see that, oh yes, that's definitely the person's grandmother or the grandfather, and you can actually link them in that way. So it can give you clues for grandparents. So people could also be named after people like their aunts and uncles. That was quite common. And also godparents. So you might find a name that actually is nothing to do with the family, but it might show you somebody who was a very close friend of the family. And it might be so that somebody wants to continue with an old family surname so that they don't want to distinguish between different generations. So I have got on my tree here, one of my ancestors is called John. He's the furthest back I can go in England on this line. He was born in 1726. He then had a son, John Anthony, in 1759. His grandson, John Samuel Martin, was born in 1787. And then his great-grandson, John William Martin, was born in 1820. Now, there's a big gap here between 1820 and his son, John Berkeley, being born in 1888. So if anybody listened to my Caroline Edith Mary Rump talk, which I did a few months ago for Project Kin, you'll realise that I put their marriage certificate in there, and she was in her 20s and he was in his 60s. And this has ended up with a missing generation. So that's another time to just look at things and just see, do things link up with the generations? Does it all follow? Does it follow roughly a 25 to 30 year period for each generation? It's what we roughly use. So this line was all de Fonblanc. So you can see that the names carry on, but it's actually relatively easy to distinguish the different people within these generations using the middle names. So there's another article here from Family Tree magazine. I'm just going to bring that one up. Oh, let's go back one. Back here. So this is where we are going to the American version of Family Tree magazine now. And this is talking about the history of the use of middle names, because middle names haven't always been around and it varies in different places. So it talks about middle names appearing from sort of the mid 1800s onwards. Before that, they weren't necessarily that common. And they can give you lots of clues in here. So you can choose to sort of check on different names and just make sure that you always look for both names. So another thing to be aware of is some people might have more than one middle name. For example, I've got cousins who are Simon, James and Peter, and actually those are all their second names. They're Christopher Simon, Timothy James and Anthony Peter. And I have no idea why they actually ended up like that, but it does make it quite interesting when you're looking for people in their trees and you're looking for information. You may well find that they are known by their middle name. But you may also find that someone changes partway through their life. So they might have been known by their first name when they're younger, then they might choose to be known by their middle name when they're a bit older, then they might go back again. You don't really know. So it's always a good idea to look for all of the different names and all the different combinations that you can possibly think of. Now, this is one of my little clusters in my family tree. This is based in Wiltshire, which is in the south of England. And I've chosen this because I thought the names are lovely, actually. So we've got Blatch, we've got Sweet Apple, and we've got Orchard. And of these people, I'm just going to move you out the way for the moment so I can just describe that. We have a James Blatch who married an Elizabeth Sweetapple. We have William Cox who married a Grace Blatch, Grace Goodenough Blatch in that case. That's my line. And then we've got John Sweetapple marrying a Mary Blatch. And then we've got Philip Blatch marrying Rachel Orchard. And I've put there, well, you can see that some of them have moved outside this country, so the name's gone on to other places. And I have actually been looking at this line this afternoon and trying to find out a little bit more about it. And this is based in Wiltshire, as I said, which is in the south of England. Wiltshire isn't actually on the coast at all. It's one of those counties that's just set inland. So Dorset is between it and the coast, and then it borders onto Somerset and different places. And today I decided actually I want to do a little bit more on this line. So I've joined the Wiltshire Family History Society for the handsome sum of £12 a year. So I think that is a bargain. And for that, you get a journal and you get access to things like memorial inscriptions online. You get other people's research interests. So I know that there are some other people who are researching, which one was it? It wasn't Sweet Apple, it was Good Enough, researching Good Enough in there. So I reached out to somebody today, and obviously that's a bit early. I haven't heard back from them, but it tells me what parishes the person's interested in. So in English ecclesiastical terms, a county is split into different parishes, and a parish may cover more than one little village. It may cover quite a large area, and they're quite weird shapes in some instances. And I just want to show you another thing here that I downloaded from the website. So let's have, oh, let's go back to this one. So this is a really good map here. This is showing all the different Wiltshire parishes. So you can see very odd shapes. It might be to do with the landscape. I have no idea why they're actually that shape. But on here, it is actually searchable. So there's a box at the top here, and I can put in a name. So if I put in Salisbury, it will then go and it highlights Salisbury for me. So if I don't know, and I'm not familiar with Wiltshire and all the parishes, this is really a useful tool for actually finding things out. And what I did with that this afternoon is I did a little bit of annotating on it. So I chose different colours and I highlighted the different parishes where my ancestors came from. And then I can actually see, well, those two parishes are next door to each other there, as are those two, Westbury and Bratton. So if I'm starting to look for people and I can see that something says Bratton or it says Westbury, it could be either of them. Or I can actually see whether the distance looks like it could be somewhere that people could travel. This is going back to the records are going back to the late 1700s, 1800s. So people wouldn't have necessarily traveled a great distance, especially if they didn't have money. If they're relatively ordinary people, you can actually start to see the relationships between different places. And I also did this for my Scottish ancestors in another line there. And it's really useful. And it sort of helps you start to learn a bit more about the counties and how things are laid out, and how much people travel, or if they didn't travel, or how it all works. So I highly recommend, if you have ancestors from England or Scotland, Wales, Ireland, wherever, find a local parish map and then start doing what I've done there. And then I'm going to gradually add to this. This is just the ones I started with today. So I've actually got people with the surname Wiltshire from Wiltshire here on this line. So that's there. So that's surnames, that's not the place. And I've got somebody where I've got the surname spelt slightly differently, so I've just given them one colour for the moment. What I also do on my ancestry is I actually put little codes into people's names on ancestry. So on Philip, for example, I've put in the suffix on his name to Canada. So if I'm looking at him on the tree, I can quite quickly see that that line's gone to Canada, or to Australia, or to New Zealand, or to South Africa, or to which country someone's actually traveled. And I find that really useful to do. And then I can actually, if I want to, start adding photographs. I know that I do it for my DNA matches. I can say I've got DNA match down one line, or I could just say this line goes to Canada, or I could put a tag on there. There's all sorts of different ways of actually categorizing things. So you can see in this case, someone's gone to America and someone's gone to Canada. There is a lot more digging to do on this line. And whilst I was having a look briefly before doing this presentation, a couple of websites that I actually did want to share with you. One is forebears.io. Now, this will actually tell you about the definition of a surname. These definitions are a definition. It's not necessarily the definition. And if you look up on other websites, you may find a different definition. So, for example, blatch on certain websites says it means somebody who's very pale and it comes from a certain area, and there's a different meaning on a different website. What it also tells you is how common it is, where it's most prevalent, and it gives you a bit of a map, and it gives you a rough frequency date based on different censuses here. So if I go back to the 1880 census, I can see that there were 24 incidences in America. 1881 was one in Guernsey, Ireland, and then you can suddenly start to see that it's gone all over the place with the most recent one. Obviously, there is another couple of censuses in between that, but they're not included as part of this. Another one here is something called name census. So this is talking about the meaning of the Blatch surname. So it's saying it means bare or bleak. So you would just put a different surname in here. Sorry, there's lots of adverts in these things. And then it will actually tell you if things have changed over the years. So you can see that Blatch, there are slightly fewer Blatches than there were over a 10-year period. It gives me different spellings of it. And it also will give me some people who are well known with that surname. Tells me their race or ethnicity. So you can see if somebody has migrated to different areas and if they're of different ethnicities there. So again, that's an interesting and quite a useful website there. I hadn't come across that one until relatively recently. So you may also come across people in your tree where they've changed your surname and you're really not quite sure why they've done it. It might be they've gone back to another surname that existed a generation or two, or maybe even earlier than that in their tree. I wanted to introduce you. This gentleman's name is Francis Drew Edwards Hodges, and he is my 2 times great uncle. And he was born in 1836 and he died in 1891. Now, this is a line I want to explore more of. And actually, it mentions here there was a financial stipulation in his grandfather's will about continuing the name Hodges. So Francis's mother was her father's heir. So there were no sons, so the surname died out there. So the grandfather wanted the name to continue, so he put it into the will. Now, the will is 6 pages long. The type on it, the handwriting is not easy to read. So I've actually asked a friend of mine to transcribe this for me. So she's doing that for me over the next few weeks, because I'm not sure where the grandfather actually came from. He was a curate, a vicar of a place called Charmouth in Dorset, and he acted as an agent for a lady called Mary Anning, who made lots of discoveries about dinosaur fossils in the area. So he's quite an interesting person. So I want to try and find out more about him. So this will happened, and in it, it stipulated that Francis had to do something within a certain period of time. Now, Francis ended up going in the army to India and didn't come back and find out about this in time. So he was due to inherit some money. And basically, first off, he did the thing about actually changing his name. So the Queen actually had to approve it. So he's changed his name there, and this article's appeared in the London Gazette. And then he changed his name, but then he ended up, it said something like he was supposed to, if he did it by a certain time, he would get £17,000, or he would get 11,000 or 12,000 pounds, and then he would get another 5,000. But he didn't do it in time. So there was a court case involving this, and the person said, you should have known. It's like you had to do it and you didn't do it. So unfortunately, you don't get the extra money. So, oh well, and in those days, that was a lot of money. We're talking about the mid 1800s, probably about 1860 something, I think it was, late 1860s. So once I get the grandfather's will, I want to explore this area in greater detail and see if I can find out more about it and see where any money came from. Because at the moment, I don't know. If he was a vicar, vicars and curates, they didn't earn a lot of money. So I don't know where the money came from, if he came from a relatively wealthy family. I know that the grandfather bought land and settled it on his daughter, because there's mention of that in her will and her mother's will and things like that. So there's all sorts of different areas to explore there. And I've got another example to show you. Richard Bennett Coffin, another great uncle of mine, my 6 times great uncle. He was born in 1715 and he died in 1796. Now, he was one of the Bennett line. You may remember them from when we started earlier on in this presentation. And he was born Richard Bennett, and he changed his name to keep the Coffin name going from his maternal line. So again, there was a stipulation there about trying to ensure that the name doesn't die out. But unfortunately, he didn't have any children. So it was a bit of a vain hope to do that. But I suppose they did it because they did think that people would actually continue. And this is actually his memorial. So this is in a place called Lawton. It's not pronounced Lawhitton. We've got friends who live very near to this. And I still went to Lawhitton. No, it's Lawton. Lawton Church, near Launceston in North Cornwall. And this is actually quite well hidden. It's around the back, and I had to move a few bits and pieces which were stored around it to actually see it. But this talks about him, and it says about actually mentions the name on there, saying that was the son of Edward Bennett and honour his wife, daughter of Richard Coffin of Portledge in Devon. So it's actually a really nice memorial there. And then I thought, right, okay, so we've had some relatively common names in a lot of ways there. I thought I'd try and find some of the more unusual ones. Now, I'm not going to go through them all because there are a lot of them, but I just thought I'd let you see because some of them are quite fun. So these come from all over the place. So Dogood, that's Scottish. Gaddo, I believe, is German. Kilo is Scottish. And I think Kitto might be as well. Pennyfather, I can't remember where that one's from. Zamprogno, I think that might be Italian. Bear in mind, these aren't necessarily people who I'm descended from. This is part of my wider tree. So I've got roughly between 10 and 11,000 people because I've done quite a lot of research and I've gone sideways in a lot of instances, and cousins and siblings and that sort of thing, and people who've married into the tree. I've got Chaucer. I've no idea if that's connected to Geoffrey Chaucer. It may well be, many, many years before. Diet. So a diet is actually, if I'm from, that's a German word, and it's to do with a parliament, a building or a meeting, a diet. Ferrenbacher, Cornegay, Kneebone, La Framboise. Now, framboise is French for raspberry. So the raspberry, I rather like that one. And I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, so please excuse me. Noliwajika. I'm fairly sure that is not how it's pronounced, but unfortunately, I don't know any better at the moment. And then we have some double-barreled names. I thought I'd just pop these on as a little thing here. So French Davis, Salisbury Trelawney, Christian Kerwin. Now, Christian Kerwin, I've got Christians, and there was a Christian married a Kerwin. De Grenier Le Bath, that's used to distinguish a particular line of the de Greniers who started off the Fonblanc line. Rawdon Hastings, Stranraer Mull, Harry Law, Houston Boswell. You can see there are some really quite unusual double-barreled surnames there. And it doesn't stop there. Triple-barreled. Alston Roberts West and Elliot Murray Kinemount. So I thought, well, I'll do a little bit of digging in these and see what happens. And then before I just show you that bit of digging that I did, I found this article, and it is from the Courier of Bridgewater, New Jersey, USA in 1896. And it says certain peculiarities in family names are noticed in nearly every community, and perhaps Plainfield has her share of one peculiarity in which a few old names are duplicated over and over again, but which from all search of genealogy in some cases show that they are not related even way back. It remains for Lebanon, however, to show the funniest combinations in patronymics. It is not so bad now, but not so long ago there was a whole menagerie there, as some expressed it. Families by the name of Lion, Tiger, Wolf, and Bear formed a part of the well-known and highly respected community. I just thought that's a lovely thing. And who knows whether they were actually even related. They could have been. So one of the double-barreled names I showed was Wright Nuth. So I've done a bit of digging on this, and this is a gentleman by the name of George Wright-Knuth. His full name is George Allen Rodney Wright-Knuth. He was my third cousin twice removed, and he was the assistant superintendent of the police in Hong Kong. And unfortunately, he was also a Japanese prisoner of war during the Second World War. And I managed to find his obituary. So there's a link to it there. And obviously, Barbara will make the slides available for everybody afterwards, and then the links can be used. And he basically was a prisoner of war. I believe it was for 4 years, but it could have been more. And he encountered some really difficult times whilst he was there. And as part of it, he was awarded various medals, including the Queen's Police Medal, the Colonial Police Medal for gallantry, later superseded by the George Medal, and received the Governor's Letter of Appreciation for his work in Stanley Prison Camp. And he wrote a memoir of his time in the prison camp. That was called a book called Prisoner of the Turnip Heads. And I just thought that's an amazing name. So if anybody wants to go and actually have a look at that, that's there. And as part of doing this research, I discovered some other things here. So this first link in the list is to the Imperial War Museum. So that's a really good resource for anybody interested in history to do with soldiers who served in England. And although this is not available online, this actually is an interview that he must have done with somebody on Radio 4, it looks like it was in 1983. So that was one of the things that was available for him. Let's just go back over here. This is his book, Prisoner of the Turnip Heads. And it's got a history of what happened, that somebody's actually written different things. And this is actually where it's really useful, because somebody else has written about a history of the Wright-Knuth family on here. So the people have combined different histories into things. Peter died in 2005. He was one of the people that, I don't know, one of my, within living memory, somebody had met him and somebody had corresponded with him. And then we've got another one here called Europeans in East Africa. So we can see that Rodney George Wright-Knuth, who got the military cross there. We've got details on his profession, who he married, who his children were, and details of his war service, and also things about obituaries in there. So if anybody has ancestors who were in East Africa at all, it's worthwhile having a look at this one. They've got an online database that you can search here, and who knows what you'll actually manage to discover. Another one here, a triple-barreled one, is Alston Roberts West. So this gentleman is Major William Reginald James Alston Roberts West, who was killed in action in 1940. He is actually the father-in-law of my fourth cousin. And I just did a standard Google search of him, and it brought up lots of different things here. So there's a memorial to him in a church in Preston-on-Stour. And this is actually his memorial on the wall here. And it gives details here. This is part of the Imperial War Museum. And it tells me what's actually written on there. So it tells me he was in the Grenadier Guards and he served in the Second World War, and very unfortunately he died, killed in action while commanding No. 4 Company of the 3rd Battalion Grenadier Guards. And the Grenadier Guards apparently will sell you photographs. So this is actually on their website here. So if I want to, I can buy a print of that and have that on the wall. If it was one of my ancestors, I may well choose to do that. So if you know that your ancestors served in the military, it's worthwhile checking if anybody's doing that. This is the first time I've come across it. I admit I haven't done much digging to find anything else, but I thought that's an interesting idea to actually give people access to things. So what sort of sites help me with my research? Find a grave. Always go to Find a Grave when it comes up in the results and see what's on there. One of the things you can also do with Find a Grave is you can add your own information on there. So if you come across some of your ancestors and you're really sure of it, the information that you have, you can set up your own account and you can start actually adding information. You can also add corrections to things that other people have done, and you can also link people together. So Find a Grave is a really good resource. I use something called Family Tree Maker, and I do reports on that. I've got one I could just show you. Hang on a moment. in this one here. I was having a look for people who were born, married, or died in Wiltshire. And so I can actually do a list there. And so I can see I've got Blatch, Sweetapple, and Goodenough, which were the surnames I was talking about earlier on. And it tells me Elizabeth Sweetapple died in 1819. William Blatch was born and baptized in 1738. So Family Tree Maker can be a really good resource, and there are other software packages that you can use which will provide you with similar reports. The London Gazette, so that was where I got the article about the change of name. So that you also will get military things there where people have been given a new rank, they've been given a medal or something like that. They'll all appear in the London Gazette. Old family wills. So if you've got any old family wills or you can get access to them, I was actually looking at a will for Joseph Goodenough today. And again, it's quite a few pages. It's actually quite legible, but that made me relook at an area. And I think I'd mixed two people up who'd got the same name. So there was an Elizabeth Grace, and then there was an Elizabeth. And I think I'd put Elizabeth Grace against the wrong parent. So I've moved her as a result of seeing her mentioned in the will. The Europeans in East Africa, that should say, site that I mentioned earlier. Telegraph obituaries. So let's just have a look at George's obituary on here. So this gives him details of the book that he wrote, a 1,000-page diary he kept whilst he was a prisoner of war. That is quite an achievement to actually have done that. And it talks about how he came to be in the army and various things. And then it mentions the name of his wife and their daughter. Again, the Imperial War Museum, Grenadier Guards, Company's House. I don't know if any of you have heard of Company's House. So if you have a limited company in England or Wales, you basically have to be registered at Company's House. That's a central database, and you can search for people and you can search for companies. So when you have a look for people, it sometimes brings up a record on Company's House, and it will actually tell you their month and year of birth, and it may give you their address or an address that they might have lived at. So that can be quite useful if you're trying to work out if you've got the right people or if you're trying to trace living relatives. I use some software called Transcript. It's free to use, and basically you put an image in the top half of it, and it will allows you to type in the bottom half, and then you can save that as an RTF file, which you can read in something like Microsoft Word. And when you scroll the screen, it does both at the same time. So you can scroll with the image showing, and then you can add typing below, and you can choose how to do it. And then you can just save that, and then you've got your own will transcription at the end of it, or whatever you want to use it for. But will transcriptions are a really good idea for that. I mentioned forebears.io and namescensus.com. So I recommend having a look at those and just seeing what comes up in terms of your surnames. And one other thing I haven't put on here is if you've come across something called GeniaNet. So that's actually a site that you pay for. It's quite cheap. I think it's about £11 for 3 months or something. But you can put your copy of your GEDCOM, which your family tree that you've got on another website on there. And I've actually had 2 people reach out to me this week about people that were also in their tree. But it will tell you, for example, what the most common surnames are and distribution. It will show you any errors you've got in your tree and things like that. So it's worthwhile also investigating GeniaNet. So that's it today. Any questions?
I have one for you. Um,
Okay.
we've, I think, crossed this path before. I have Coffin in my family, and was a quite distinguished family here in the United States in the early American history. The line that uh, came to America was Tristram Coffin lived 1609 to 1668, 1681, sorry, who is descended from a Peter Tristan Coffin. Do any of those names ring any bells? They are from Cornwall, Devon. Let's see. He was born in,
They were
let's
definitely
see.
from Cornwall, or the
Yeah,
ancestors that I've got.
Brixton. Yeah,
I
Devon.
visited the Hurno, Cornwall, which is the Cornish Archives, the record office, a couple of years ago, and had a look there. And they had a book about the family Prideaux, and the Prideauxs and the Coffins intermarried. So it's worthwhile maybe sending them a message and
Hmm.
asking them if there's somebody who could do some research for you, or
Mm-hmm.
if you want somebody. I actually do know somebody who lives quite close to that, somebody I interviewed a while ago. But it's worthwhile just checking with the local archives and just seeing what information they've got on a particular
Yeah,
surname.
yeah, yeah. It's an interesting family here in America. And yeah, they went out of their way to keep the name alive, despite
Interesting when you
the
consider what the name
suggestion.
actually is, isn't it?
I know. I remember it was one of the ones that caught me the first time I looked. I was like, what? Isn't that a little awkward?
Yeah,
This
you
has
do
been,
wonder about the origin of some of these names when you see them, and you just think, okay, some of them seem obvious, and other ones you just think, why would you be known by that? Did you
hmm
make coffins? Um,
hmm
It probably comes from a coffin maker originally.
yeah,
If in the UK.
yeah, but it must be a long, long time ago,
Yeah.
maybe the 1500s or something.
No, it's probably even further back because
Mm,
they're normally called by their occupation,
mm.
yeah,
Christian name and an occupation.
yeah. The earliest one I have is a Peter Tristram coffin, birth 1514 in, again, Devon, died in 1566 in Cornwall. How accurate it is, I don't know, but again, coffin builders perhaps.
Well, one of the other things is worthwhile thinking about is people do Y DNA studies on surnames to actually see how far back you can trace in a particular area, and it's worthwhile having a look to see if there are any existing coffin ones, and
Mm.
if getting in touch with the people who've done that.
Yeah, well, there are certainly living people with a name coffin.
Mm.
Definitely.
Because on
Here
the
in the
male
US
lines, you
anyway.
can go back sort of easily 10 generations plus.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I love the double and triple barreled names. Americans always find that especially entertaining, and we think that we invented this idea of hyphenated last names in the 70s.
I was actually really quite surprised when I looked through it and was thinking, oh my God, look at some of these. And it's like, some of them I knew, and other ones it's like, really? And other ones it's like, but that's the other thing. Also, in this country, a lot of triple barreled or longer, you do get longer names, are people in the aristocracy. So the Alston Roberts West ones, they're quite well born. I won't say more because there are a lot of living people there, but they're related to the Duke of Westminster and things. So yeah, so there's various different lines there that are quite yeah, aristocratic.
Well, it does sound rather highfalutin.
Mm, mm.
Well, I want to be mindful of your time. So again, if you have questions, jump on in now because she's going to have to run. Go ahead.
You're on
I'll
mute,
help you.
Jennifer.
I can do it for you. There you go.
Not a question, but just an interesting one in our family is the name Lloyd. It's my two sons' grandmother, great grandmother from Wales. So her maiden name was Lloyd, and when she had children, all the children had the middle name. Every child, she had 13 children, and all but two were boys, and they all had the middle name Lloyd. All those boys had large families who all had the middle name Lloyd, and so it went out and out and out. And my dad's family, all his brothers are Lloyd. I think it stopped there, although there are a few dotted around in my generation, but and even one family who didn't have boys named their daughter's middle name Lloyd. Yeah, and all their Christian names are the same. So you've got all these William Lloyds, John Lloyds in just
Nightmare.
multi-generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got cousins named the same, because they name them off. You'll have 5 different ones in different cousins. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
first cousins all with the same age, same name. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
mm,
yeah.
That's Wales for you.
yeah.
There's like
Yeah,
10
exactly.
surnames that
Yeah,
just repeated everywhere.
yeah,
So Morgan, Thomas, Davies, Jones,
yeah.
etc.
The naming traditions, I love the patterns and naming traditions as they carry down into individual families, including those that make them up.
Yeah, yeah.
In naming our daughters, my father-in-law said, I will help with a middle name. And I thought, oh, how sweet. We hadn't been married very long. I didn't quite understand the concept. And then he comes back, he says, exactly what time and, hour and day of the week and so on was she born? Okay, pass that along. And then it comes back and here's the name. Oh, I thought we're talking about a suggestion. No, here is the name. And what I didn't understand is this is a tradition that goes back 21 generations, Chinese
Oh,
generations,
yeah,
with a
yeah.
poem that was written in about, 900, something like that. And this very long poem, the family has taken the next character in that poem. Now, in recent generations, they actually said, nah, the rest of it's kind of boring. So just
Yeah,
recycle back to the top and start going through. But it is kind of cool for today's
yeah,
generation, for my husband who has, a lot of cousins that are his seven brothers and anyway, lots of cousins all the way around. If I meet someone with the same last name and middle name, in China, they are likely extended relatives because they're
yeah.
all of the same generation of the same last name following the male line. It's pretty breathtaking. And
Mm,
when you look at it at that kind of scope, and I was humbled. And while it's a little awkward carrying around a name that's hard to write the characters of or spell, or do we choose Pinyin or Wade Giles, romanization systems, so many questions. um, it creates a really wonderful feeling of connection to time. And that's what we're all here for, right?
yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Emma, thank you so much for making the time in a busy schedule to keep to the schedule and make these events happen. Any last words about what you're thinking about for next month?
Not yet. No, I haven't decided. I've got a couple of different options. So I'm going to go and have a look at those and just see which one I want to do first.
Okay. Well, I couldn't quite manage it this week, but by February, I'd love to invite you to join me on the live session on Sunday, the week ahead,
Mhm.
to a little, tiny segment to tell me a little bit about what's ahead, because those are
Let me
always
know.
fun. All righty,
Happy
you
to do
got
that.
it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much. So I know you need to dash, and I
I
want to
do.
keep to the time. And
Thank you.
all the rest of you are very welcome to stay. I am going to turn off the recording and we can just relax. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.